When Emma canceled, I thought it would hurt. Jerry stood in the middle of my apartment, his hands shoved so deep into the pockets of his jeans that his shoulders looked stiff. He swallowed hard before speaking again. But it didn't. His voice cracked just enough to make me stop pretending I was busy rinsing 2 coffee mugs in the sink. I turned toward him, confused by the look in his eyes. We'd known each other since we were 12. We'd survived bad haircuts, terrible summer jobs, failed math exams, and one unforgettable camping trip where we accidentally set off every car alarm in the state park. I'd seen Jerry nervous before. I'd never seen him like this. He took one slow breath. Because I wasn't thinking about her. The words landed somewhere between us, quiet but impossible to ignore. Then his eyes finally met mine. I was thinking about you. Everything inside me froze. The faucet kept running. Somewhere outside my apartment, a siren echoed through downtown Chicago. I remember every tiny sound because my brain refused to process the sentence I'd just heard. I wish I could tell you I knew exactly what to say. I wish I could tell you I'd seen this coming all along. The truth is, I just stared at him while my heartbeat completely forgot how to behave. The weird part is, none of this would have happened if Jerry hadn't asked me one ridiculous question about a month earlier. Can you teach me how to dance? I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the grocery bag I was carrying. You drove 20 minutes just to ask me that. Jerry shrugged with the kind of embarrassed smile that always made people forgive him before he'd done anything wrong. It's a serious question. No, it's absolutely not. Larry. Jerry. Come on. I unlocked my apartment door while he followed me inside, carrying a carton of eggs like he'd contributed half the groceries. You know ballroom dancing. Your mom made you take lessons for years. She called it character building. Exactly. It was torture. You still know how. I set the groceries on the kitchen counter and crossed my arms. Why now? His ears turned slightly pink. That should have been my first clue something strange was happening. Instead, I just waited. Because he rubbed the back of his neck. I kind of want to ask Emma to the Spring Arts Gala. Emma Collins? Yeah. The Emma Collins? There's only one Emma Collins. The Emma who's somehow nice to literally everybody. That's part of the problem, he admitted. She's nice to everybody. I need something that'll help me stand out. And your brilliant strategy is dancing? She loves dancing. He looked at me hopefully. Imagine showing up already knowing how. I couldn't help smiling. It was such a Jerry idea. Sweet. Optimistic. Slightly ridiculous. So you're asking your best friend to save your love life. Exactly. That's a lot of pressure. Please. He gave me the same hopeful expression that had convinced teachers to extend deadlines and neighbors to help him move furniture. I sighed dramatically. One lesson. His face lit up. Really? One lesson. I repeated, pointing a finger at him. If you step on my feet more than 10 times, I'm charging you for physical therapy. Jerry laughed, so loudly the neighbors probably heard him. At the time, it felt like the beginning of a funny little favor between best friends. Looking back now, I think my heart had already agreed long before my mouth did. The next afternoon, right around 6:30, someone knocked 3 times on my apartment door with the exact rhythm Jerry always used. I opened it to find him standing there with 2 large coffees balanced in one hand and a paper bag from the bakery downstairs tucked under his arm. I come bearing caffeine and carbohydrates, he announced. Please tell me this is a bribe. It is absolutely a bribe. I stepped aside so he could come in. At least you are honest. I know my audience. Jerry handed me one of the coffees before dropping onto my couch like he had lived there for years. Honestly, after 4 years of friendship, it almost felt that way. We met our freshman year of college because he accidentally stole my backpack from the library. He insisted our identical black backpacks made it an understandable mistake. I insisted only one backpack had my name written across the front in blue marker. Somehow that argument turned into lunch, then movie nights, road trips, and an unspoken agreement that if either of us ever needed help moving furniture, the other would complain the entire time, but still show up. So, I said, sitting across from him, you drove all the way here with expensive coffee. I assume this is not just because you enjoy my company. Your confidence is inspiring. Thank you. It is also completely deserved. I raised an eyebrow. Flattery before the favor. Smart. Jerry took a long sip of coffee before staring into the cup like it contained the courage he needed. There is this girl. I blinked. Wait. You are serious. Very. You? Yes, me. The The same Jerry Walker who once described dancing as, and I quote, organized public embarrassment. He groaned. Can we pretend I never said that? No. I have excellent memory when my friends say ridiculous things. He pointed at me. That is exactly why I almost asked someone else. Almost. Then I remembered everyone else would laugh harder. Accurate. He rolled his eyes, although he was smiling. Her name is Emma. Emma Collins? He nodded. She invited me to her sister's wedding next month. Congratulations. Do not congratulate me yet. Why not? He sighed dramatically. Because weddings have dancing. I waited. Lots of dancing. I kept waiting. Larry. Jerry. You are enjoying this way too much. A little. I am trying to be vulnerable. And I support that. You are smirking. That is supportive smirking. He tossed a napkin at me, which landed somewhere near my foot. You are the worst. Yet somehow you still brought me coffee. He laughed despite himself. Look, Emma actually seems excited that I am coming, and I do not want to spend the entire reception hiding beside the dessert table pretending I am fascinated by cheesecake. That is a respectable strategy. I need a better one. So you want dance lessons? I want survival lessons disguised as dance lessons. I leaned back in my chair, pretending to think much harder than necessary. Do you realize ballroom dancing requires trust, balance, timing, and approximately 1,000 opportunities for me to watch you trip over your own feet? I was hoping you would leave that last part out. I cannot make promises I cannot keep. Jerry buried his face in one hand. I already regret asking. You have not officially asked yet. He looked up with exaggerated patience. Larry Brooks, will you please teach me how to dance before I embarrass myself in front of the prettiest woman I have ever met? I let the silence stretch just long enough to make him nervous. Then I grinned. Fine. Tomorrow. 7. Jerry grinned right back, relief spreading across his face so quickly it was impossible not to smile with him. Neither of us knew it yet, but he was learning to dance for the wrong person. The next evening, Jerry showed up exactly at 7 wearing athletic shorts, a faded college sweatshirt, and bright blue running shoes that looked ready for a 5-mile jog instead of a dance lesson. I opened the door, looked down at his feet, then back up at his face. Please tell me those are not the shoes you plan to wear. Jerry glanced down. What is wrong with them? They are running shoes. Correct. We are not running. Not yet. I sighed dramatically and stepped aside. Come in before I change my mind. He followed me into the living room where I had pushed the coffee table against the wall to make enough space. A small speaker sat on the bookshelf waiting to play music. Jerry looked around like he had just entered a dentist's office. Why does this suddenly feel terrifying? Because you know I am about to witness your complete lack of coordination. I was hoping confidence counted for something. It does. Good. Unfortunately, you did not bring any. He laughed and tossed a throw pillow at me. I caught it with one hand. Very mature. I panicked through comedy. I noticed. I turned on the music, letting a slow instrumental fill the room. All right. Stand here. Jerry obeyed, shoulders stiff enough to look carved out of concrete. Relax. I am relaxed. Jerry. Fine. I am aggressively attempting to relax. I walked around him once, trying not to smile. First rule. Stop staring at your feet. How else am I supposed to know where they are? Trust me. That feels irresponsible. You have 2 options. Trust me, or spend the wedding hugging the snack table. That is emotional manipulation. It is effective emotional manipulation. He reluctantly looked up. Happy. Much. I demonstrated the first few basic steps, then motioned for him to copy me. 1 step forward. 1 step back. Side. Together. It should have been simple. Instead, Jerry somehow managed to step directly onto his own foot, stumble sideways, and nearly lose his balance without me being anywhere near him. I blinked. Then I started laughing so hard I had to grab the back of a chair. Jerry looked offended. Do not laugh. I do not even understand how that is physically possible. He folded his arms with exaggerated dignity. Talent. That only made me laugh harder. Even Jerry eventually started laughing too, shaking his head at himself. You know, he said, I thought dancing would be difficult because of rhythm. And apparently my greatest enemy is me. That does seem to be the pattern. After a few more attempts, I stepped closer. All right. Hold still. Why? Because your posture looks like someone just told you taxes are due tomorrow. I reached over and gently adjusted his shoulders, encouraging him to stand straighter. Relax your arms. He nodded without speaking. Lift your chin a little. He did. For one strange second, he just looked at me instead of listening for the next instruction. His usual sarcastic grin disappeared, replaced by a quiet expression I could not quite read. What? I asked. He blinked. Nothing. Then he looked away so quickly I wondered if I had imagined it. I dismissed the thought almost immediately. He was probably embarrassed. First lessons were awkward for everyone. Still, as he tried the steps again, something about the determined wrinkle between his eyebrows made him unexpectedly adorable. The word appeared in my head before I could stop it. Adorable? Seriously, Larry? He was my best friend struggling through beginner dance steps, not a puppy learning how stairs worked. I shook the thought away and clapped once. Again. This time he only stepped on his own foot twice. Progress, I declared. That is an incredibly low standard. Yet somehow you cleared it. By the end of the lesson, Jerry was sweating, exhausted, and dramatically insisting he had discovered muscles that should not exist. After he left, I cleaned up the room and glanced out my apartment window just in time to see him stop beside his car. Instead of driving away, he put in a pair of earbuds, looked down at his feet, and quietly practiced the same basic steps alone under the parking lot lights for nearly an hour. I smiled to myself. Maybe he really wanted to impress Emma. At least, that was what I thought. By the second week, our lessons had quietly become part of the rhythm of everyday life. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Somewhere along the way, the schedule stopped meaning much. Jerry would text me on a Monday afternoon asking if I was busy because he had forgotten one turn. Then he would show up on Wednesday claiming he needed to work on posture. Friday became coffee that somehow turned into another 30 minutes of practice. Sunday afternoon became, I was already in the neighborhood, even though I knew perfectly well he lived nearly 20 minutes away. I never pointed it out. Neither did he. The funny part was that he really was getting better. The guy who had once tripped over his own sneakers could now keep time with the music, move without staring at the floor, and even spin without looking like he had just stepped onto a moving treadmill for the first time. I cannot believe I am saying this, I admitted after he completed a sequence almost perfectly. You are actually improving. Jerry placed a hand over his heart. That is the nicest thing you have ever said to me. Absolutely not. Top 5. Maybe top 20. I will take it. He flashed that familiar grin, the one that always looked completely genuine, and I found myself smiling before I realized I was doing it. We still joked through every lesson. Every misstep became another sarcastic comment. Every successful turn earned exaggerated applause. Somehow dancing had become less about surviving Emma's sister's wedding and more about laughing until one of us nearly forgot the next step. That should have been another clue. I just did not recognize it. One Thursday evening, I set my phone on the shelf and lowered the music until only a soft melody filled the apartment. All right, I said. You are ready for partner dancing. Jerry immediately looked suspicious. That sounds significantly more dangerous. Only for my patience. Comforting. Come here. He walked over, suddenly quieter than usual. The basic steps stay the same, I explained. The difference is learning how to move with another person instead of by yourself. He nodded, paying closer attention than I expected. I stepped in front of him. Your right hand goes here. I gently touched the side of my shoulder blade to show the position. After a brief hesitation, Jerry carefully rested his hand where I had indicated, almost as though he was worried about getting it wrong. Good, I said softly. Not too stiff. Easy for you to say. Relax. You have been telling me that for 2 weeks. Because you keep forgetting. I smiled before lifting my own hand. Now your other hand. He offered it without a joke this time. I wrapped my fingers around his, adjusting the angle slightly. Like this. For some reason, neither of us moved. The music continued playing. My hand stayed around his. His stayed around mine. It was only a few seconds. Maybe less. Long enough for the room to feel strangely quiet, even with music filling it. Then I cleared my throat. All right. Step forward. We began moving again as though nothing unusual had happened. Maybe nothing had. Maybe I was simply overthinking a perfectly ordinary dance lesson. We practiced another 20 minutes before collapsing onto opposite ends of the couch with bottles of water. Jerry leaned back, catching his breath. Can I ask you something? Depends. Why have you not dated anyone lately? The question sounded casual, almost random. I laughed once. That came out of nowhere. Did it? He shrugged. I was just wondering. I thought about it for a second. I guess I have been busy. Busy for how long? Long enough that my mom has started introducing me to random people at family barbecues. Jerry laughed. That sounds terrifying. It is. Anyone interesting? Not really. He nodded slowly, staring at the water bottle in his hands instead of looking at me. Huh. It was such a small conversation that I barely thought about it afterward. When the lesson ended, I walked him into the hallway like I always did. He stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. Same time Saturday? He asked. Unless you suddenly forget how to walk again. That happened one time. 3. You count everything. The elevator doors began sliding closed. Jerry shook his head, smiling as they disappeared between us. I stayed there a second longer than usual, watching the metal door seal shut before finally turning back toward my apartment. Something had changed. I just did not know what. By the third week, the lessons barely felt like lessons anymore. Jerry still came over with coffee more often than not, except now he no longer knocked before texting, "I am outside," as though that had quietly become our routine. Some nights we practiced for an hour and then spent another hour arguing over takeout. He insisted one pizza place made the best crust in the city. I told him his standards were dangerously low. He claimed I was a food snob. I reminded him he once called gas station nachos life-changing. He still defended that opinion with alarming confidence. Somehow, every conversation wandered away from dancing. We talked about childhood memories, jobs we secretly hated, the places we wanted to visit someday, and the embarrassing dreams we had before life became practical. I realized I laughed more on the nights Jerry came over than I did the rest of the week combined. He noticed something too. One evening, after I had demonstrated the same turn for what felt like the 20th time, he leaned against the kitchen counter while I poured us both iced tea. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. "That depends. Is it another argument about gas station nachos?" "This one is serious." I looked up. "You smile more now." I blinked. "Do I?" "Yeah." He shrugged. "When we first started this, I thought you were just doing me a favor. Now," he searched for the right words, "you actually look happy when we practice." I laughed softly. "That obvious?" "Only to someone who has known you for 4 years." I looked away for a second, pretending to focus on the glasses. The strange thing was, he was right. Somewhere between correcting his terrible posture and celebrating the first time he completed an entire sequence without stepping on himself, I had started looking forward to these evenings. They broke up the routine of work, groceries, laundry, and all the ordinary little responsibilities that made adulthood feel repetitive. More honestly than I wanted to admit, I had started looking forward to seeing Jerry. Before I could answer, he smiled in that quiet, genuine way that always felt different from his sarcastic grin. "You always show up." I looked back at him. "What? No matter how busy you are." He shrugged again. "I asked for help, and somehow you are there. You have always been like that." The sentence settled somewhere deep inside me. Nobody had ever described me that way before. I was not even sure I deserved it. I cleared my throat and forced a lighter tone. "Well, somebody has to stop you from embarrassing yourself at that wedding." "See," he laughed. "Even your compliments come with insults." A couple of nights later, I decided it was time for the next step. "Tonight," I announced, setting the speaker on the bookshelf, "you are leading." Jerry immediately looked horrified. "That sounds like a terrible decision." "It is literally the point of partner dancing." "You have seen my decision-making." "I have. It concerns me daily." He groaned. "Fine. What do I do?" I stepped into position across from him. "You already know the steps." Knowing and leading feel like two completely different things. Because you keep asking permission with every movement. I gently adjusted our starting position. Stop asking permission with every step. Just trust yourself. He took a slow breath. Then he led the first step. It was cautious. The second felt steadier. By the third sequence, something shifted. He stopped looking uncertain and started listening to the music instead. We moved naturally across the living room, turning without awkward pauses, laughing only when one of us barely avoided the edge of the couch. 4. The first time, I was not teaching. I was simply following. The song reached its final notes. The music faded into silence. Neither of us moved. Our hands remained together for another second. Then another. The apartment felt unusually still. Jerry looked at me with an expression I could not quite understand. Finally, he smiled. "I think I finally understand why people like dancing." I smiled back. "Why?" His eyes stayed on mine. "I do not think it is really about the dancing." Before I could answer, The sharp buzz of his phone shattered the silence. Jerry glanced down at the screen. The smile on his face changed into surprised recognition. "It is Emma," he said quietly. Jerry stared at his phone for several long seconds before letting out a slow breath that sounded strangely calm. "Everything okay?" I asked. He looked up and gave me a small shrug. "Yeah, that does not sound very convincing." He glanced back at the screen one more time before locking it. "Emma just texted me." I waited. "She said she has been thinking about it." Another pause. "She thinks we are better as friends." I studied his face, expecting disappointment, frustration, maybe even embarrassment. After all, the entire reason we had started these lessons was because of Emma. This was supposed to be the moment everything came crashing down. Instead, Jerry looked thoughtful, quiet, almost puzzled by his own reaction. "You okay?" I asked again. He nodded slowly. "That is the weird part." "What is?" I thought it would hurt more. I leaned against the kitchen counter. "It is okay if it does. It kind of does not." He frowned at the floor as if trying to solve a math problem. "I mostly feel bad that I wasted her time." "That sounds reasonable." And he hesitated. "I feel bad that I wasted your time." I blinked. "My time?" He looked genuinely confused that I seemed surprised. "Yeah. Jerry, you did not waste my time. I asked you to teach me all this because I thought it would help me ask Emma out. And now it turns out none of it mattered." I laughed softly. "That is where you are wrong." He looked up. "You learned something new." "Sure. You survived partner dancing." "Barely. You stopped stepping on your own feet." That was a proud day. We both smiled, but something about his answer lingered with me. He had just been turned down by the girl he had spent weeks trying to impress, yet the thing bothering him most seemed to be whether he had inconvenienced me. It was oddly sweet. We ended up ordering burgers instead of practicing much that night. Conversation drifted everywhere except Emma. We argued about movies, laughed about one of our professors from college who always wore the same green sweater, and somehow spent 15 minutes debating whether cereal counted as soup. By the time Jerry stood to leave, the apartment had grown comfortably quiet. He slipped on his shoes, but stopped before opening the door. "Can I ask you something? You ask a lot of questions lately." "Occupational hazard." "You do not have an occupation that requires questions." "Details." I folded my arms. "Go ahead." Jerry rested one hand on the doorknob. "If Emma had not canceled." He looked at me for a second before finishing. "Would you have kept teaching me?" "Obviously." The answer came so quickly neither of us had time to think about it. He nodded once. "And after?" I frowned. "After the wedding?" "Yeah." I considered it for a moment. Honestly, I had never thought that far ahead. The lessons had always been tied to the wedding in my mind. Or at least I thought they had been. "I do not know," I admitted. "Why?" Jerry looked down at the floor, then back at me. "Because." He rubbed the back of his neck the way he always did when he was trying to explain something awkward. "I do not want to stop." My heart gave one strange, unexpected beat. "Why not?" He smiled, almost shyly. "I like spending time with you." The sentence hung quietly between us. Then, almost immediately, both of us reached for the safest explanation possible. I laughed first. "Well, we are best friends." Jerry nodded with obvious relief. "Exactly. Of course we like spending time together. That is literally how friendship works." "Pretty much." The tension disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. Or at least that was what we told ourselves. Jerry grinned, opened the apartment door, and waved as he headed toward the elevator. I watched him leave with an odd warmth settling somewhere I could not quite name. We had explained everything perfectly. We were best friends. Of course we wanted to keep seeing each other. That explanation made complete sense. It was also becoming just a little harder to believe. A few days later, Jerry came over while my cousin Mia was helping me assemble a new bookshelf that had somehow arrived with approximately 200 screws and instructions that looked like they had been translated through 3 different languages. Jerry walked in carrying a paper bag of cinnamon rolls. "I brought reinforcements," he announced. Mia looked from the bag to Jerry and smiled immediately. "I like him already." "That is because I come with pastries," Jerry said. "An excellent first impression," Mia replied. The 3 of us spent the next hour arguing over missing screws that were not actually missing, laughing every time one of us realized we had installed another shelf backward. Jerry and I slipped into the same rhythm we always did, finishing each other's jokes, teasing each other over tiny mistakes, and somehow turning ordinary conversation into something that made all 3 of us laugh. At one point, I reached across him to grab the screwdriver at exactly the same time he reached for it, and we both instinctively apologized before laughing because neither of us had actually done anything wrong. Mia watched the entire exchange without saying much. She simply smiled to herself. After Jerry offered to run downstairs for more coffee, Mia quietly followed me into the kitchen while the apartment door clicked shut behind him. She leaned against the counter and folded her arms. "You like him?" I almost dropped the mug I was reaching for. "What, Jerry?" I laughed because the sentence sounded ridiculous. "He is my best friend." Mia nodded once. "That is not what I said." The smile faded from my face. "You are reading too much into this." "Am I?" "Yes." She tilted her head, studying me with the unfair confidence of someone who had known me my entire life. "You smile differently when you look at him." I opened my mouth to argue, but nothing came out. She did not wait for an answer. She simply shrugged, picked up the empty coffee pot, and walked back toward the living room as though she had merely commented on the weather. She never tried to convince me. She never explained what she meant. She just left the thought sitting there. Jerry came back a few minutes later balancing 3 coffees with exaggerated concentration. "Nobody move," he announced. "I have achieved perfect beverage equilibrium." Mia accepted her cup with a grin. "You are surprisingly talented." "Finally," Jerry said dramatically, "someone appreciates me." "Do not encourage him," I replied automatically. "Too late," Mia laughed. "I think he is delightful." The afternoon passed like every other afternoon with Jerry. Easy, comfortable, familiar. Yet Mia's words refused to leave my head. "You smile differently when you look at him." That night, after everyone had gone home, my apartment felt strangely quiet. The next morning my phone buzzed while I was making breakfast. Jerry had sent a picture of himself attempting to make pancakes. They looked more like oddly shaped maps than breakfast food. The caption read, "Rate my culinary masterpiece." Before I realized it, I was already smiling while typing back, 2 out of 10. Generous grading. A second later my phone buzzed again. Harsh but fair. I laughed out loud in an empty kitchen. Later that week, when Jerry knocked on my apartment door for another lesson, the entire place somehow felt brighter the moment he walked inside. Music started. Conversation filled every room. Even making dinner together became entertaining because Jerry somehow managed to burn garlic bread that only needed to be reheated. "I have a gift," he insisted. "For creating new forms of disappointment," I answered. He laughed so hard he nearly dropped the baking tray. Hours passed without either of us noticing. Then, just like always, he grabbed his jacket, smiled, and headed toward the elevator. The apartment became quiet again. I stood in the middle of the living room listening to the silence settle over everything. For the first time, I noticed how empty the place felt after he left. And for the first time, I wondered if Mia had seen something I had been trying very hard not to notice myself. The morning of Emma's sister's wedding, Jerry showed up at my apartment carrying 2 dress shirts on matching hangers and wearing the most uncertain expression I had seen on him in weeks. "Emergency," he announced before I could even say hello. "That depends. Blue or gray?" He held them up like they were impossible life decisions. I have been staring at these for 15 minutes. I stepped aside, trying not to laugh. "You drove all the way here because you could not pick a shirt?" This is exactly the kind of support system best friends are supposed to provide. I am beginning to question that definition. He followed me inside anyway. I looked at both shirts for a moment before pointing at the blue one. "That one. Really? Definitely. Why?" "Because it makes your eyes look brighter." The words slipped out before I had time to think about them. Jerry smiled. "See? That is why I came." He disappeared into the bathroom to change while I stood in the kitchen pretending to organize absolutely nothing. A minute later the bathroom door opened. "Well?" Jerry asked. I turned around. Then I forgot how to answer. The blue shirt fit him perfectly. It was simple. Nothing flashy. Just enough to make him look different. Not different because of the shirt. Different because, for the first time, I was seeing him without the automatic filter of familiarity that had existed for 4 years. He was still Jerry. The same sarcastic, awkward, endlessly kind person who had accidentally stolen my backpack in college. But suddenly I noticed the confidence he had quietly built over the past month. The way he stood straighter now, the relaxed smile that reached his eyes, the easy way he carried himself. I simply stared. "Why are you staring?" Jerry asked, half laughing. I blinked so quickly it almost hurt. I was not. Larry. I was evaluating the shirt. For 10 straight seconds, heat rushed into my face. Professional evaluation takes time. He narrowed his eyes with obvious amusement. Sure. I cleared my throat and grabbed my coffee mug before I embarrassed myself. Any further? It looks good. He smiled again. Thanks. The wedding lasted most of the afternoon, and I spent the rest of the day trying very hard not to think about why I had forgotten how to speak when Jerry walked out wearing a blue dress shirt. Around 9 that evening, another familiar knock echoed through my apartment. I opened the door to find Jerry still wearing the same shirt, except now his tie had disappeared and the sleeves were rolled halfway up his forearms. You are back. I figured I owed you a post-game report. I laughed. Come in. We ordered takeout because neither of us felt like cooking. Jerry sat on the couch, absent-mindedly turning a soda can in his hands. You know what everybody kept asking today? How impressive your dance moves were. Shockingly, yes. He smiled before the expression slowly faded. But they also kept asking why I am still single. I shrugged. Families always ask that. I know. He looked thoughtfully across the room. It just made me realize. I am not even sure what I actually want anymore. I stayed quiet. He continued, almost to himself. I spent so much time thinking I needed to find the right person that I never stopped to ask what being with the right person is supposed to feel like. The room settled into a comfortable silence before Jerry looked over at me again. Can I tell you something that sounds weird? Since when has that stopped you? He smiled faintly. Whenever something goes wrong. He paused. You are the first person I want to call. My chest tightened in a way I could not explain. Before I could answer, he checked the time and stood up. I should let you get some sleep. I walked him to the door like always. He slipped on his jacket, then looked back at me with that same easy smile that had become so familiar. This was the best part of my day. He waved once and disappeared toward the elevator. I closed the apartment door behind him and stood alone in the quiet living room. My eyes drifted toward the empty space where we usually practiced. For weeks I had told myself I enjoyed teaching him to dance. That explanation no longer felt true. The realization arrived so gently I almost missed it. I was not looking forward to the dance lessons anymore. I was looking forward to Jerry. Monday morning, my phone buzzed while I was halfway through answering emails. It was a message from Jerry. Just 6 words. Can we meet tonight? No smiling emoji. No joke about coffee. No ridiculous meme. No sarcastic comment about dancing. Just one simple question. Somehow that worried me more than anything else could have. I spent the rest of the day replaying every conversation we had shared over the past month, trying to figure out what I had missed. By the time someone knocked on my apartment door that evening, my heart was already beating faster than it should have been. I opened the door. Jerry stood there with both hands in his jacket pockets. He did not walk inside the way he always did. He stayed near the entrance, almost like he was unsure whether he belonged there. Everything okay? I asked quietly. He nodded once, but it looked more like he was convincing himself than me. After a long silence, he finally spoke. Emma was never really the problem. I waited. I kept thinking that after she said we should just be friends, I would eventually miss what I thought I wanted. He let out a slow breath. But nothing changed. His eyes stayed on the floor for another second. Except I kept wanting to come here. My chest tightened. A few days ago, Mia ran into me at the grocery store. I blinked. She asked me one question. He smiled faintly. She said, "Have you figured it out yet?" I could almost hear Mia saying it. Jerry laughed softly at himself before shaking his head. At first I thought she was talking about Emma. Another pause. She was not. He finally looked at me. When Emma canceled, I thought it would hurt. His voice was steadier now, but it did not. The room became impossibly quiet. Because I was not thinking about her. His eyes never left mine. I was thinking about you. It was exactly the moment I had replayed in my head 100 different ways since the first words left his mouth. Except this time, I knew everything that had brought us here. I stared at him for one heartbeat, then another, and before I could stop myself, I laughed. Not because what he said was funny, because relief arrived all at once after 2 weeks of quietly driving myself in circles. Jerry's face fell immediately. Right, he said, taking one small step backward. That was probably a mistake. I should not have. Jerry, he stopped. I am not laughing at you. I walked closer until there was barely any space between us. I have been driving myself crazy for 2 weeks. He looked completely confused. I smiled in spite of myself. I thought I was looking forward to the lessons. I shook my head. I was looking forward to you. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then Jerry laughed, the kind of laugh that sounded like someone finally setting down a weight they had been carrying for far too long. So, he said carefully, we are both kind of idiots. Spectacularly. Good. He smiled. I was hoping it was not just me. 1 week later, we carried the same little speaker into the community room downstairs because the weather had turned rainy and neither of us felt like staying inside our separate apartments. Jerry looked around the empty room before smiling at me. No Emma. No wedding. He slipped his hands into his pockets. No reason to keep practicing. I walked toward him and held out my hand. You still owe me one dance. He looked at my hand for only a second before taking it without hesitation. The music began softly through the speaker. At the beginning of all this, Jerry had stared at his feet and counted every single step out loud because he was terrified of getting it wrong. This time he never looked down. Neither did I. Nobody counted anymore. We simply moved together, laughing whenever the music surprised us, talking between turns, and discovering that sometimes the best dances begin long before anyone realizes they have already taken the first step.